the Real Kraken. For centuries, sailors spoke in lowered voices about something that lived below the reach of sunlight. A creature vast enough to wrap a ship in its arms, strong enough to pull timber, iron, and men into the black water beneath. The stories were remarkably consistent across cultures and oceans, yet they were dismissed almost universally. Enlightenment thinkers labeled them maritime folklore. Victorian scientists were harsher. They called the Kraken a drunken hallucination, a monster invented by exhausted men staring too long at empty horizons. That confidence did not age well. The legend of the Kraken aligns closely with a real animal that science itself refused to accept for most of its history: Architeuthis dux, the giant squid. For much of the 19th century, the animal was known only from fragments. A severed tentacle here, a beak found in the stomach of a whale. These remains were treated as curiosities, not proof. No intact specimen had been studied. No one had seen one alive. Without a body, the scientific establishment concluded the creature must be exaggerated or imaginary. But the ocean was never obligated to reveal its secrets on command. Modern evidence confirms that the giant squid is not a myth and never was. It is one of the largest invertebrates on Earth, with verified specimens reaching extraordinary lengths when their feeding tentacles are fully extended. Its eyes are the largest of any known animal, evolved to detect faint light in the deep sea, where predators and prey exist as silhouettes in near-total darkness. Its arms are lined with powerful suction cups, many ringed with sharp, rotating hooks designed to grip and hold struggling prey. When giant squids surface, usually injured or dying, the sight is unmistakably monstrous. The body thrashes violently. Long tentacles writhe across the waves. Sailors encountering such an animal in poor weather, at night, with limited visibility, would not have seen a calm biological specimen. They would have seen a living chaos of muscle, arms, and pale flesh rising from the deep. Exactly as the legends describe. What early sailors reported was not fantasy, but timing. Giant squids live far below the surface, beyond the reach of early exploration. They were real, but inaccessible. Science rejected the accounts not because they were impossible, but because they were inconvenient. It was not until the late 20th and early 21st centuries that technology finally caught up. Deep-sea cameras captured the first images of live giant squids in their natural environment. The creature did not behave like a myth. It behaved like an apex predator perfectly adapted to a hostile world humans barely understand. The sailors were not exaggerating. They were early witnesses to a biological reality that science refused to acknowledge. The Kraken was never imaginary. It was simply waiting in the dark. The Flores Hobbits. For generations, the people of Flores Island told stories about something small that lived in the forests and caves. They called them the Abugogo. According to local accounts, these beings were short, hairy, and moved quickly. They spoke in a strange, murmuring language that sounded almost like echoes. They stole food, vanished into limestone caves, and avoided direct contact with villagers. Anthropologists who heard these stories in the 20th century treated them as folklore, another example of island myth-making shaped by isolation and imagination. That dismissal collapsed in 2003. During an archaeological excavation in Liangbua Cave, researchers uncovered a partial skeleton unlike anything previously documented. The bones belonged to an adult individual, yet the body was astonishingly small, just over 3 feet tall. The skull was tiny, with a brain far smaller than modern humans, yet it showed signs of complex organization. Nearby were stone tools deliberately shaped and used. The remains were dated to tens of thousands of years ago, long after modern humans were thought to be the only surviving hominin species. The species was named Homo floresiensis. At first, scientists resisted the conclusion. Some argued the skeleton belonged to a modern human with a developmental disorder. Others suggested pathological dwarfism. But the more bones that were found, the harder those explanations became to sustain. Multiple individuals showed the same proportions. The wrist bones were primitive. The feet were unusually long relative to the legs. The jaw lacked a chin. These were not deformed modern humans. They were something else entirely. A distinct human species. Homo floresiensis appears to have evolved through island dwarfism, a well-documented biological process in which large species shrink over generations due to limited resources. On Flores, elephants became miniature. Humans did too. Isolated for hundreds of thousands of years, these hominins adapted to their environment, surviving with simple tools, hunting small animals, and navigating rugged terrain. What made the discovery truly unsettling was the timeline. Evidence suggests Homo floresiensis may have survived until as recently as 50,000 years ago, possibly later. That means modern humans and these hobbits overlapped in time. They were not prehistoric abstractions. They were neighbors in deep history. Suddenly, the Abugogo stories looked different. The descriptions align uncannily well. Small stature, cave dwelling, strange speech, opportunistic behavior around human settlements. What had been labeled myth now resembled oral history, cultural memory passed down long after the creatures themselves disappeared. J.R.R. Tolkien did not invent the idea of hobbits. Nature did. And for a brief, forgotten stretch of time, we were not alone in our humanity. The myth was never fantasy. It was remembrance. The Amazon warriors. Greek writers spoke of them with a mix of awe and unease. A society of women who rode horses, mastered the bow, and met men in battle without apology. In the epics, these Amazons lived beyond the edges of the known world, governed themselves, and fought as fiercely as any army Greece could field. Later historians dismissed the accounts as symbolic fiction, stories invented to explore anxieties about gender, order, and civilization. According to that view, the Amazons were never meant to be real. The ground tells a different story. Across the Eurasian steppe, archaeologists have spent decades excavating burial mounds belonging to nomadic cultures known collectively as the Scythians and their relatives, including the Sarmatians. These were horse-based societies that dominated vast territories from the Black Sea to Central Asia. Within many of these graves, researchers made a discovery that forced a re-evaluation of ancient assumptions. A significant number of the skeletons buried with full combat equipment were female. These women were interred with the tools of war: iron daggers, battle axes, quivers of arrows, and composite bows designed for mounted combat. Some were laid to rest wearing armor. Others were buried with their horses, a practice typically reserved for elite warriors. The skeletal evidence was equally revealing. Many showed healed fractures, blunt force trauma, and embedded arrowheads consistent with battlefield injuries. Their leg bones bore the characteristic curvature associated with lifelong horseback riding, a physical signature of steppe warfare. These were not ceremonial burials. They were warriors. The proportions vary by site, but in some regions, researchers estimate that up to 1/3 of Scythian war graves belonged to women. This was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. In societies where survival depended on mobility, archery, and defense of territory, women were not excluded from combat roles. They trained, fought, and died alongside men. The Greek accounts now appear less like fantasy and more like cultural translation. When Greek travelers and soldiers encountered steppe societies where women rode armed and fought openly, they filtered those observations through their own social framework. What they saw as shocking or unnatural became exaggerated into legend. The Amazons were portrayed as outsiders not because they did not exist, but because they did not conform. Stripped of mythic embellishment, the Amazons were real women living real lives in harsh landscapes. They were daughters and mothers shaped by necessity, not ideology. The legends were never satire. They were eyewitness accounts, distorted by distance and disbelief. The Amazons did not vanish because they were imaginary. They vanished because history forgot how common they once were. The dire wolves. Modern culture treats the dire wolf as fantasy, a dramatic exaggeration, a mythical beast enlarged for television, softened into a loyal companion for fictional heroes. That perception could not be more wrong. The dire wolf was not invented by storytellers. It was a real animal that dominated the American landscape for hundreds of thousands of years, and it was far more dangerous than its fictional counterpart. The species, now known as Inociandirus, was one of the most formidable predators of the late Ice Age. It ranged across North and South America, thriving in environments filled with massive prey. Dire wolves were built differently from modern gray wolves. Their bodies were heavier and more robust. Their skulls were broader. Their jaws were reinforced, adapted not just for killing, but for processing bone itself. This was not a pursuit hunter relying on speed alone. It was a power predator. The evidence is overwhelming, and it comes from a single, grim location. The La Brea tar pits in what is now Los Angeles have yielded thousands of dire wolf skeletons, more than any other large carnivore found there. The tar acted as a natural trap. Herbivores wandered in and became stuck. Predators followed. Dire wolves came in numbers, drawn by the promise of an easy meal, only to be captured themselves. Over time, their remains accumulated in staggering quantities. These fossils reveal an animal specialized for a brutal lifestyle. Tooth where patterns show extreme stress consistent with cracking open bones to access marrow. The limbs indicate strength rather than endurance. Dire wolves were not sprinters. They were ambush hunters that relied on numbers, coordination, and raw force. Their prey was enormous. Ancient horses, bison, camels, even young mammoths. And they did not hunt alone. Dire wolves likely operated in packs, amplifying their already significant killing power. To encounter one would have been dangerous. To encounter many would have been fatal. Humans lived alongside them. Early human populations in the Americas shared this landscape with dire wolves for thousands of years. These were not distant prehistoric abstractions. They were competitors. Both species hunted the same animals. Both depended on large game for survival. Archaeological evidence suggests humans had to actively defend themselves, using fire, weapons, and group coordination to deter predators that saw them as either rivals or prey. The dire wolf was not a magical creature. It did not need fantasy to be terrifying. It was a real apex predator shaped by an unforgiving world, one that vanished only after the collapse of Ice Age ecosystems and the spread of human hunters. The myth is not that dire wolves existed. The myth is that they were anything less than monsters. The zombie fungus. The idea of a zombie apocalypse is usually filed under fiction, a fear born from movies, comics, and exaggerated science. The concept seems absurd when applied to humans. A parasite that invades a body, overrides free will, and turns the host into a vehicle for its own spread. For most species, that nightmare does not exist. For ants, it does. In tropical forests around the world, a group of fungi known as Ophiocordyceps has been perfecting biological mind control for millions of years. This is not metaphor. This is not storytelling language. It is a documented life cycle observed, recorded, and studied by biologists in real ecosystems. When an ant becomes infected, it begins with a single spore. The spore attaches to the ant's exoskeleton, penetrates the body, and starts to grow internally. At first, the ant behaves normally. It continues working, foraging, and moving with its colony. Then, gradually, something changes. At a specific point in the infection, the ant abandons its normal routines. It leaves the colony and climbs upward through the vegetation, often to a precise height above the forest floor. It selects the underside of a leaf or twig. There, the ant clamps its jaws down in what researchers call a death grip. Once locked in place, it never lets go. The ant dies shortly after. What makes this phenomenon especially disturbing is how controlled the process is. The fungus does not randomly kill its host. It positions the ant in an environment with ideal temperature and humidity for fungal growth. After death, the fungus consumes the ant's tissues from the inside. Then it does something even more unsettling. A stalk erupts from the ant's head. This structure releases spores that fall onto the forest floor below, directly into the paths of other ants. The cycle repeats with ruthless efficiency. Entire patches of forest can become graveyards, dotted with the corpses of ants fixed to leaves, each one a completed transmission event. For years, scientists believed the fungus directly hijacked the ant's brain. More recent research suggests something even stranger. The fungus appears to surround the brain while manipulating the ant's muscles through chemical signals, effectively turning the body into a puppet without destroying the central control center. The ant is not simply infected. It is repurposed. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It is happening right now in forests across the globe. Nature did not imagine the zombie apocalypse. It engineered it. Long before humans told stories about the end of civilization, parasites had already learned how to erase autonomy, override behavior, and turn living creatures into tools for their own survival. The Lost Atlantis. For centuries, Plato's tale of Atlantis has captivated imaginations. A vast, technologically advanced civilization suddenly swallowed by the sea. A utopia lost in a single day and night. Skeptics dismissed it as allegory, a philosophical story about hubris and the dangers of imperial ambition. But beneath the myth lies a story that is both geological and historical, a catastrophe so immense it could have inspired the legend. Around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, known today as Santorini, experienced one of the largest eruptions in human history. Its force has been estimated to rival, if not exceed, the energy released by 1,000 modern atomic bombs. The eruption obliterated much of the island, sending ash plumes miles into the atmosphere, raining pumice over neighboring islands, and destabilizing the Aegean climate for years. But the destruction was not contained to Thera alone. The blast triggered massive tsunamis that raced across the Aegean Sea, striking Crete with devastating force. The Minoan civilization, already an advanced Bronze Age society with sophisticated palaces, running water, vibrant frescoes, and extensive maritime trade, suffered catastrophic losses. Entire coastal settlements were submerged. Infrastructure that had taken generations to build was reduced to rubble. The written and artistic records of the Minoans show a sudden interruption around this period, an abrupt silence that mirrors the narrative of annihilation Plato described. Archaeological excavations at sites like Akrotiri on Santorini reveal a snapshot of life frozen in time. Homes, streets, and storage jars were preserved under thick layers of volcanic ash, almost like Pompeii of the Bronze Age. The scale of the eruption, combined with the resulting tsunamis and ash fallout, provides a plausible explanation for Plato's story. Atlantis may never have been a fantastical continent. It may have been a real place, its story handed down, exaggerated, and mythologized over centuries. The Minoans were masters of the sea, trade, and urban planning. Their sudden disappearance would have seemed almost supernatural to the peoples who survived. To ancient storytellers, a civilization vanished by the fury of nature could easily be recast as a city punished or hidden by the gods. Over time, the memory evolved, entwining fact with legend, until the term Atlantis became shorthand for ultimate loss and cosmic punishment. Plato's Atlantis was not a magical city lost in a fairy tale ocean. It was a Bronze Age superpower, erased in an instant by the unimaginable force of the earth itself. The eruption of Thera stands as one of humanity's earliest recorded encounters with the raw, indiscriminate power of nature, and a stark reminder that myths often begin with truth. The city Troy. For centuries, the story of Troy existed in the realm of legend. Homer's Iliad painted a world of gods, heroes, and epic battles. Achilles, Hector, and the fabled wooden horse captured imaginations, but historians long assumed they were poetry, not history. The Trojan War, they argued, was a literary invention, a cautionary tale of pride, honor, and human folly, not a real siege with walls and warriors. That assumption changed in the late 19th century. A German businessman and passionate antiquarian named Heinrich Schliemann decided to treat Homer's text as more than myth. He interpreted the Iliad as a literal guide and began excavating the Hizarlik mound in modern-day Turkey. What he uncovered stunned the academic world. Layers upon layers of settlements emerged, each representing successive cities built and destroyed over millennia. Among these layers were massive stone fortifications, towers, and gates, indicating a city of significant wealth and strategic importance. Most striking was evidence of violent destruction. Burnt layers of ash, collapsed walls, and scattered debris suggested a catastrophic event. Archaeologists concluded that the city had been attacked and sacked around the Late Bronze Age, roughly 1200 BC, precisely the period scholars had speculated might correspond to the mythical war. Artifacts such as jewelry, weapons, and ceramics revealed a thriving urban center abruptly interrupted by fire and conquest. The details of Homer's narrative may be poetic, but they were grounded in reality. The wooden horse, often dismissed as fantasy, might have been metaphorical, a battering ram, an ingenious siege tactic, or even a catastrophic earthquake that weakened Troy's defenses. Ancient storytellers transformed events into legend, infusing human drama and divine intervention into what was likely a historical conflict. What once seemed purely fictional now had a physical home. Troy was not just a tale. It was a city built, lived in, and destroyed, its story preserved in both epic poetry and the archaeological record. The blend of myth and history shows how human memory preserves truth in allegory, embedding factual events into stories designed to inspire and warn. Homer did not invent Troy. He immortalized a real city, its people, and the violence they endured. Beneath layers of dirt and centuries of skepticism lay a truth that reshaped our understanding of myth, proving that sometimes stories of gods and heroes begin with very human history. The Viking Sunstone. For centuries, Norse sagas whispered of a strange artifact, a sunstone, a crystal that could reveal the position of the sun even when the sky was thick with clouds or fog. The tales were dismissed by scholars as metaphor or fantasy, the product of a poetic imagination. How could a simple rock guide ships across the vast, storm-lashed North Atlantic? To most historians, it was legend, mystical thinking from a superstitious age. Modern science tells a very different story. The Vikings were master navigators, crossing hundreds of miles of open ocean with no compass, no maps, and no modern instruments. Archaeological finds, coupled with experimental research, suggest they relied on a remarkable mineral, Iceland spar, a type of calcite crystal with a property called birefringence. When light passes through this crystal, it splits and polarizes, creating a visual cue that can be used to determine the sun's direction, even when it is obscured by clouds, mist, or fog. In practice, the navigator would hold the crystal up to the sky and rotate it. Through subtle changes in brightness and color, the position of the sun could be pinpointed with astonishing accuracy. Some experiments suggest within 1 degree, or roughly a 99% success rate. This technique, entirely optical and entirely mechanical, required no electronics, no calculations, just the precise understanding of light and the disciplined skill of the mariner. With this magical crystal in hand, the Vikings could voyage across treacherous seas, locate distant islands, and return home reliably. It was not sorcery. It was applied physics, centuries ahead of its time. Recent experimental reconstructions have shown that Iceland spar could allow a ship to maintain its course even under heavy, overcast skies, something previously thought impossible for pre-modern sailors. The implications are profound. The Vikings were not merely raiders or traders. They were explorers who relied on a deep understanding of the natural world. Their sunstones were not mystical trinkets. They were navigational instruments capable of guiding humans across the Atlantic long before other Europeans dared to attempt the journey. Legends of magic often hide truth. This sunstone was not a product of superstition. It was a tool, a crystal that transformed the chaos of clouds and storms into reliable guidance. In a world without GPS, the Vikings had their own method, a sharp eye, a steady hand, and the physics of light trapped inside a humble piece of Icelandic rock. The sagas were not telling fantasy. They were recording a science so advanced it seemed like magic to those who came later. The stone surgeons. The image of a Stone Age human performing brain surgery feels absurd. It conjures visions of a caveman nervously scratching at a skull with a sharp rock, hoping for the best. Yet archaeological evidence tells a story far more astonishing. Trepanning, or trepanning, stands as the oldest known surgical procedure in human history, practiced thousands of years before written language, without anesthesia, antibiotics, or modern knowledge of infection. Across continents and cultures, from prehistoric Europe to the Andean highlands, archaeologists have uncovered skulls bearing carefully crafted holes, deliberately cut or scraped into the bone. These are not accidental fractures or ritual punctures. The edges of the holes are smooth, worn, and rounded, indicating that the bone had time to heal. Many skulls show evidence of multiple procedures, suggesting that individuals survived one operation only to endure another years later. The tools were rudimentary, flint knives, sharpened stones, or even shells. Yet the precision achieved is remarkable. Holes were circular or oval, often strategically placed over areas of injury or disease. The purpose of these procedures remains a topic of debate. Some were likely intended to relieve pressure from head trauma. Others may have been attempts to treat epilepsy, mental illness, or infection. Anthropologists also suggest a spiritual dimension, releasing spirits or malevolent forces trapped inside the skull. Whatever the intention, the results demonstrate that prehistoric humans were capable of understanding the connection between intervention and survival. The survival rates implied by healed bone are staggering. Without sutures, anesthesia, or sterile conditions, these patients endured pain, risk of infection, and blood loss. And yet, they lived. Skull regeneration shows not only the body's resilience, but also the surgeon's skill. These early practitioners observed, experimented, and learned what worked over generations. They were not reckless. They were methodical and surprisingly effective. Trepanning persisted for thousands of years. Some cultures continued the practice well into the Middle Ages, a testament to its perceived efficacy. For a procedure to be retained across millennia, it must have worked more often than it failed. These Stone Age surgeons were not charlatans or mystics. They were the first neurophysicians, laying the foundations for a medical tradition that would evolve into modern neurosurgery. The next time we scoff at prehistoric humans as brutish or unskilled, we should remember this. They opened skulls with nothing but stone, understanding in some way the fragility and resilience of the human brain, and somehow, against all odds, kept people alive. Their knowledge was real, practical, and life-saving. The myth that brain surgery is modern innovation does not survive the evidence. Our ancestors were already operating millennia ago. The rogue waves. For generations, sailors whispered about them in hushed tones. Walls of water that rose from nowhere, towering above calm seas, capable of smashing even the largest ships into splinters. They were the stuff of nightmares, sudden, colossal waves that appeared without warning, vanishing just as quickly. Mariners called them rogue waves. Scientists called them folklore. According to prevailing theory, a wave so massive could not exist. Oceanography textbooks dismissed them as exaggeration, the tall tales of old seamen trying to make sense of storms. That dismissal did not last. On New Year's Day, 1995, technology finally caught up to the myths. A laser-based measuring system on the Dropner oil platform in the North Sea recorded something extraordinary. Out of an otherwise calm and predictable sea rose a wave 84 feet high, nearly 3 times the height of the surrounding swells. It appeared spontaneously, without warning, and then receded, leaving the platform untouched, but forever changing the understanding of the ocean. This was the Dropner wave, a rogue by every definition, a transient, unpredictable monster of water. What made it remarkable was not just its size, but its sheer impossibility according to classical models of wave formation. Traditional linear wave theory could not account for a single wave far exceeding the statistical limits of surrounding swells. Yet here it was, measured, verified, and undeniable. The accounts of sailors who had encountered such waves centuries before were no longer tales. They were eyewitness testimony confirmed by science. Rogue waves are not rare illusions. They are the ocean's capacity for sudden, violent extremes. They arise from complex interactions, currents colliding with opposing swells, wind patterns feeding energy into a single wave, and deep water physics that amplifies height unpredictably. Ships once thought unsinkable have been capsized. Lives have been lost. Entire decks ripped away by waves that, moments before, did not exist. These phenomena remain a humbling reminder of the ocean's power. Sailors' legends were grounded in experience, encoded in stories that science initially refused to take seriously. The sea produces monsters beyond human expectation, capable of defying probability and challenging the limits of engineering and survival. Rogue waves are real. The myth is the ocean itself, beautiful, vast, and capable of sudden, incomprehensible violence. The seafarers were not lying. They were speaking the truth, long before anyone had the instruments to prove it.